Hello again, I'm Kenny Fikes, host of your iKnowMedia Roundtable, where we continue to bring you conscientious clarity through both empirical experience and reasoned application and analysis. How are you guys tonight?
Amazing.
Good. How are you?
Elisa?
Hey guys, I'm Elisa Simmons, and I am excited for tonight's conversation and hoping that our conversation will spark your conversation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jay Ellis, and I'm a mom of three. I'm a physician, and I'm a disability advocate, and I'm always excited to be here, but have some interesting news to share with all of you.
Michael?
Michael Malobsky. I am a pediatrician in Denver, Colorado, father of 7, and always feeling privileged to be part of the conversation.
Great. So before we get into today's topic for our show, let's go back to Jay Cherie because the timing is pretty relevant and we should have mentioned it a week ago. She has news for us about the American Disabilities Act.
Thanks, Kenny. We wanted to share with our audience news about the ADA, or the Americans with Disabilities Act. Last week, on July 26th, the ADA celebrated its 30th anniversary. So at first, that doesn't sound like it's a big deal. But when you consider that this was a bill, which later became a law, that gave people with disabilities certain basic civil rights that they didn't have before. And this was passed in 1990. So for those of you who are our contemporaries, we were adults when that act was passed. Prior to that act, it was okay to tell someone with a disability that they could not live in a certain place or they couldn't attend a certain school. Even though in 1976, there started the IDEA, which is the special education law, people with disabilities didn't have any rights outside of that. So if you didn't need services under special education, let's say you were a wheelchair user, someone could deny you entry to a college. And I know people that has happened to. I know a couple of people who were instrumental in writing the law, and they have very compelling stories about that. And the reason that it's really important for us to know this and to be aware of what it says is we want to make sure that we are not oppressing people with disabilities. But even more than that, because a lot of people think, well, I don't have a disability. No one I love has a disability. It doesn't really affect me. But in fact, it does. One of the things that you need to know, and I don't want to scare you, right? But if we're all blessed to live long enough, there's a good chance that we develop some sort of impairment. So for some of us, it might be vision, could be your hearing, could be some severe arthritis or something else. And if you ever find yourself in that position, you definitely want to know that there are laws that will protect you against discrimination because of your disability. And so it's important that you know that. Also, there's something that affects you that started because of the ADA, and that's the FMLA, or the Family Medical Leave Act. So a lot of us have had the pleasure and the privilege to use that. That law was written in 1993, so not that long ago. And that law says that if you are sick and you need to take time off from work because you're sick, or because you're just caring for a loved one who might be sick, or maybe it's just maternity leave, it says that your employer cannot fire you for up to a year. Now, they don't necessarily have to pay you, depends on what their contract is, but it gives you job security. And so without the ADA, we wouldn't have an FMLA. And so anytime you're thinking about taking a medical leave, remember the ADA. And definitely be aware of what it says for employees especially. But if you are an employer of people, you need to know what the ADA says. And ultimately, this is just so that we can all enjoy a wonderful quality of life. People with disabilities want to live, work, and play in the community just like everyone else. And so I encourage you to learn some more about the law. And next year, hopefully you'll celebrate on July 26th for the 31st anniversary of the ADA. Thanks for giving us an audience.
Amazing.
Awesome. And as I said, we will come back and do another show on it completely, but wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about that now and our audience to hear about it and for us to hear it as well. So today we're going to talk about, I don't want to pose it as sides because we're trying our best to give that conscientious clarity through reasoned analysis and application without being political or choosing sides. But sometimes it's kind of difficult to do because people may accuse one of taking a side if one comes down in an area that may sound like one political party's talking point. But with that said, I'm going to point out that even though a lot of what's been happening and what inspired us to start doing this podcast in terms of Black Lives Matter, and that things are happening in the country, we hope that we're at a touch point where we're moving in a different direction. That even with that, it kind of seems to center around what white people are doing. For example, the reason I said not sides, you look at Portland and what's happened in Portland a few weeks ago, becoming sort of the epicenter of the Black Lives Matter movement, even though Portland is about 6% African American. And then you look at some of the people in certain places, small town USA, for example, a video we're going to show today in a town in Arkansas. There's a lot of hate and a lot of things going on there. And you have to wonder what's going on with these people and why they're so excited about Black Lives Matter. Wouldn't it be nice if people just spoke up to injustice, period? So even if we gave them the credibility of saying that Black Lives Matter was a radical left-wing violent group, which I don't believe, but if we gave them that, wouldn't it be nice if they protested against Black Lives Matter and against the Ku Klux Klan and against the Nazi Party, all things that are wrong? So with that, we don't need a clip of what's been happening in Portland. It's been all over the news. Everyone's seen that. But we're going to fade out for a second or insert the video of what's happened in this little town in Texas. I'm sorry, Arkansas. Is it Harrisonburg?
Harrisonburg.
So Harrisonburg. So let's take a look at that, and then we'll come back.
Harrison, Arkansas is the most racist town in the United States.
Have a little pride in your race, brother. White pride worldwide.
I wouldn't say after dark, man.
Honestly, dude, you have balls of steel because you could get hospitalized by some guys that want to beat your ass.
I've had several old men come out here, look out the window and tell me, says, you better go tell that nigger to get out of here and shit.
About 10 minutes, I'm gonna be back. You better be fucking gone.
Okay, come back.
One of them white lies. We matter too. You're a white man. Crazy.
You're a dumbass motherfucker. You dumb shit.
You racist motherfucker. Are you a Marxist?
Communist.
Domestic terrorist.
Why don't you take it to Chicago or New York and hold it up for the shit together? Explain to me why Ku Klux Klan.
Real fucking job.
I'm Jesus.
Get your ass out of town. That shit don't make shit here.
Hey, all lives matter, not just black. You're a Caucasian.
You're white.
You look like a white guy holding a black lives matter sign. What's the deal with that?
Not your shame. You're a white boy carrying that stupid sign.
You're white, aren't you? Oh, boy. Hey, buddy, how you doing?
I'm good, how are you?
Good. Hey, you saying something too?
Yes, sir.
I am good.
Because I'm tired of seeing this right here is the biggest hoax there ever was.
It's just the next thing to ask.
It is.
Yeah, black lives do matter, but what about ours, man?
Apparently black people's lives matter more than us.
Apparently.
You know, the Irish have...
Hey, Mike, how's your day going? Walmart, they put out this statement.
I would ask you to leave. Exactly what I'm saying is exactly what they would ask me to do.
Okay, so I talked about not having sides. So let's talk about this in a way as best we can. We know what's happening in Portland again. So, and even within those people, some were pushing nonviolent protests and some were lighting fires and throwing things. So we know who the Trump people are, and I'll throw some things out there. But Elisa, why don't you start us off with what do you think about what's happened in Portland?
I think that right now in our country, we're at such a volatile situation where it's like the perfect storm. We have COVID, who has everybody stuck in their house. You have the racial tensions, a pro and con, like people who racism is real. We have to end it. We're over it. And then the other side is like, racism no longer exists. Y'all got to let this go. And I think every fire is going to have a starting point when it gets, when it gets bigger. And I think Portland is where we're seeing it for us right now. I think for me, what's interesting about the situation in Portland is that if you go and look at the police officers, when they start talking about what's going on, it makes you have to question. It makes it easy not to have a side, because you'll have this. I watched an interview with one of the police chiefs, and he was talking about how it's funny to him that on the police side, there's more Black people than there are on the Black Lives Matter protest side. And that these Black Lives Matter people, who are the people who are pretending or using that as their shield, the Black Lives Matter as their shield, are saying racist things to the Black police officers. And so I think that's one of those things where, as Americans, if we support Black Lives Matter, we need to say, wait a minute, like, you don't get to disrespect. We're wanting no one to get disrespected. And you can't talk about Black police officers' noses being the widest you've ever seen, or the biggest you've ever seen, and then pretend that you're standing up for Black Lives Matter, because that is a racist comment. And so I think there's a lot to dissect what's going on with Portland, which should allow people who don't want to be on a team to be able to say, this is the situation that's wrong, this is the situation that's wrong, rather than just co-signing 100% either side.
Gotcha. Sounds good. Michael, what do you think about Portland? What's happening there?
So, the thought I had about the Portland situation was that I'm just, given the racial makeup and the way that colors the meaning of the protest, I think on some level, is I think that there's a piece of this, just as the leadership of the NAACP and the leadership out in Portland mentioned, that the possibility that there's a lot of just virtue, using this as a chance to virtue signal and simply just let people know what to be participating for the sake of participating, and not really losing the central focus of who this is really about and what this is really about, meaning protest for protest's sake by a bunch of privileged white kids who are just using this as an opportunity to forward their own agenda that may have nothing to do those issues and the central values at hand.
Yeah, so there are two sides to that as well. Again, we're going to keep coming back to this thing that Michael introduced to us about two things existing in the same space. So on one hand, what began as protests against police brutality and racism, after the federal troops came into Portland, it became about those white protesters. But as one of the people in Portland said, I think he was a minister, he said, still, some Black leaders in Portland say any attention drawn to inequalities is a step in the right direction. Jay, what do you think?
I think that I agree with that. I guess any attention is good, but we do want to be careful we have to be responsible about how we bring the attention. People are angry, people are frustrated, and we understand that. But we also have to understand that if we don't bring the message in a way that is nonviolent, the people who most need to hear us will not. So I think we always have to consider that. I think that even when it comes to our supporters, those people who may not be Black, who may be white, who may be Latinx or whatever, they also need to understand that. I think there's a reason why Martin Luther King Jr.'s message was so very compelling, and it was because there was a certain piece that he brought and he talked about, and that was part of what made him a great leader. So I think we do have to be careful in how we bring the attention. I think one of the things with Portland I would love to understand is, what is it about this community that has allowed these protests to go on for so long? And when I say allowed, that sounds bad, right? I mean, I take my hat off to them. I'm like, y'all are just badass all the way. Y'all have been protesting for almost 2 months now. And what is it? What is the dynamic that makes that possible? Also, what is the dynamic where you have a lot of people who are non-Black, particularly white people, who are right there on the front lines, willing to get whatever happens to them, as well as Black people. What is it that makes some of them stand in front of Black people and shield them? I would love to understand that. I would love to understand what the history is or what the dynamic is that goes on there but hasn't gone on elsewhere. I think there's a lot to be dissected here and that we could learn from. And it's just an oddity in ways. I think in terms of the federal troops there, kind of this is not surprising given the way that this administration is. And this administration believes in very extreme tactics and believes in extreme tactics when, in my opinion, they are not necessary. So it's not real surprising. I think what is more upsetting to me is that in Michigan, when you had protesters who were protesting about the quarantine and who were threatening their own governor, I have a problem with the fact that the Capitol stopped its business because these people were there and they were threatening to lynch and kill their own governor. I have a problem with the fact that, William Barr didn't see it necessary to send in federal troops, and certainly Donald Trump did not. And so that bothers me.
Yeah, William Barr actually was asked about that, and his answer was to skirt around the idea that his responsibility is for federal facilities. And so, albeit the protesters, or whatever you call them, with the guns threatening to lynch the governor in Michigan, it was for state authorities. And so it went back to states' rights. So it's this wonderful play on when it's convenient for them, they choose one thing, and when it's not, it's another. And he was asked that very question. In fact, I've talked about this before, the idea that he's acting more like an interior minister than an attorney general who represents the people versus the president's personal lawyer. Back to Portland for a second. I don't know if this is a stereotype or if there's some truth to it. Speaking to your question about what has allowed it to go on, like why, what's the power behind it? What's the fuel? I don't know the makeup of Portland, but my understanding is that sort of West Coast, a little bit more sort of, throw the term around, liberal leaning. And do we believe that it's younger white people and or more educated white people? And so younger people have more relationships with people who don't look like them, and older people who are well-read, that's different as well. So want to chime in on that, Elisa?
You know what? I think that, sadly, I think one of the reasons why it's been able to happen so long in Portland is because the majority of the protesters are white. And so it doesn't look as dangerous. But the thing earlier, Jay, when you said all attention is good attention, I think what Portland is doing, I worry that not all attention is good attention. I worry that some of this attention is becoming dangerous because what people not from Portland are hearing is that Black Lives Matter has taken over a city and they are running rampant. They hear the word Black, that's what they hear. And so they're associating that with that it's Black people have taken over a city in our country, and we can't let that happen here. And so it's feeding hostile thoughts that have already been completely woven into the fabric, specifically in the South in this country. And I think with Portland, with it being, whether it's young people or whether it's older white people, what I think sometimes you have to realize is that at the end of the day, you might stand in front of a Black person and shield them, but you get to go home white. And you can put your sign away and walk down the city white. And if you, go ahead.
And so that's what I believe is the fuel, right? Mm-hmm. That's the fuel behind it. Michael, what do you think about that question in terms of the makeup of the white protesters in Portland, and what's sort of the fuel behind it?
So I was thinking about this while you guys were talking, because I was trying to draw an analogy, here in Denver, outside of Denver is Aurora, Colorado, where Elijah McClain was murdered by police. And it was, I honestly didn't know a lot about it until I started looking into it. It was pretty egregious abuse. It was it just wasn't filmed on video in such a dramatic way that we saw directly on video. So therefore it didn't get quite the same attention. But that protest was pretty intense here, but it, like everything else, time just wore it away, and people just got back to having to go to work, I guess, and having to support their families and having to, and it was truly here. It looked to me, it was driven mostly by the Black community. The Black community was the engine behind that protest, and it got a lot of publicity, I believe, nationwide when it was at its peak. So it does sort of baffle me, because you would think that something like that would have the same staying power and similar ability to self-perpetuate. But in the end, out here, and it may just be regional, it may just be having to do with the kind of place where you live, and the kind of, every place is its own little country in terms of how values are expressed and what people do. But time out here, time for everything like this in Colorado, it just sort of wears it away, because people just,
and it's like politics is local. And so I would think about, so now thinking about, as we talked about that group in Portland, what about that other group? So I'll give you a couple things in terms of the actions, or maybe I'll talk about that group a little bit in Arkansas, and then I'll spin back around if you guys speak a little bit about what Donald Trump has done, which sometimes there's the analogy, right? There's, you connect things, there's a hypothesis. If he's behaving this way, then he must be trying to appease those people. And so it reminds me of Andrew Gillum in Florida in the gubernatorial debates, talking to Ron DeSantis, who is now the Florida governor. And DeSantis accused Gillum of calling him a racist. And I love the line. Gillum said, essentially, I don't have it exactly, but basically he said, hey, Mr. DeSantis, I didn't call you a racist, but the racists believe you're a racist. And so that was a strong line. So I would think about this. So the people, and go to Jay Cherie to start on this. What do they want? So when you watch a video like the people, and I'm not saying the whole state of Arkansas, anyone watching it, when I say that here, I'm talking about that video we saw. The people in Arkansas on that video, what do they want? So if it's MAGA, Make America Great Again, we live in a place where technology and learning and wisdom and information is growing, and it's clear to most people that diversity is a good thing, that our brains are the same, right? And given equal opportunities, we go ahead. So what is it that they're looking for? What are they so angry about? Why does Black Lives Matter make them so angry? What is that?
Well, I think for the people in that video who were venomous enough to make the comments that they did publicly, these people are driving down the street shouting out their car windows. They are this upset, right? They can't just even drive past this man. I think that they just are hateful. They are racist to their core. And what that gave them was an opportunity to show that. And we see that a lot, really, when we see all of these videos that go viral about people behaving badly towards people who are non-white, whether they're yelling at someone who's Latinx, or they're making comment to someone who's Black, and just making comments that aren't even within context. Like, it's even one thing when you get the so-called Karen, right? And the Karen is gonna post you up and be like, hey, you can't do this here. Who are you? Do you belong here? At least we can say that person has a vested interest in their community. That's not what these folks had. These folks were just happy to be able to say what was probably been on their mind, what they would probably love to be able to say on a daily basis, but they realize that they just might lose their jobs if they say it at work, or they might get punched in the face, right? They say it to the wrong person. But this is in their hearts. And it's my personal belief that this is one of the things that has made Trump successful in certain populations, because he came along and he said, you do not have to be politically correct any longer. You get to say whatever's on your mind and no one can stop you, and have at it, go for it. I think that it's that attitude that is part of why we have seen such an increase in hateful acts against people who are non-white, right? Why we see so many hateful acts and violence against Jewish people, because I think that this administration has come in and given people the ability to say what they've wanted to say for years. I think what you saw are people who have been racist for forever. Because I do think that there's a population of people who really are in a quandary about Black Lives Matter. Like, they feel personally affronted, right? Like, oh my God, does it mean like my life doesn't matter? And that's not what it means. But for those people, they really have questions and they feel concerned, right? They're just like, what are you saying? You saying it's okay to kill us? No, that's not what we're saying. But then you got that other group that's on that video. And those are the people that you don't want to be close to. They're dangerous, and they're too foolish to even keep their mouths shut.
So Elisa, speaking of the Arkansas video, I don't hear a lot of solutions other than blaming. For example, Mexicans are bad, black people are lazy, Muslims. There's a lot of hate going around against Islam right now, and people are saying it openly because I guess they assume if you're so you can't say American, right? Like we come in all shapes, sizes, and colors, but they look at me and assume that I'm a black person in the South and I must be Christian. So they're very open about Muslims. And so what are they looking for? What's the MAGA thing about? And why don't you hear solutions? Why do you hear more hate versus solutions? Because we all know that a society that fails to change eventually presides over its own demise, whether that was ancient Mesopotamia or the Roman Empire or local governments. Why are they so happy to be stuck in the now, hoping that they can keep this hate going? I don't know. What do you think of that idea?
You know what? I think the reason why we don't hear solutions, which is the concept, make America great. I think the solution is education. But I think the reason we don't hear solution is because we've become teams in our country. We're on a team, and I'm going to ride or die with you as my teammate no matter what. And I've talked to more than a handful of white people, specifically white males. And as I'm talking to them, I'll ask, do you feel attacked in our country right now, right? And they're like, yeah, it is a hard time to be a white man in America right now. And my thought when they say that, I'm like, that right there means that you should understand how black men feel. Because if you're feeling attacked, it doesn't matter the longevity of the attack. If a group of white men are saying, we feel like we're being turned into America's bad guys, and we feel like we are getting blamed for all this stuff and we're the bad guys, then you need to reach out to black men and say, hey, is this what y'all were talking about? I don't have to think you were right, but if I feel that way and I'm telling you, you can't feel that way, that's victimizing, then that should be a bridge built. But I think what happens though in Arkansas, they are invested in their community. They have a bubble that they've created that they want to stay a specific way. And I think because what it takes to change or to make progress requires you acknowledging why we're at this point. And America does not want to acknowledge our history. We want to just say, keep moving forward. Remember 9/11, but don't remember slavery. Remember, all these things, but don't remember the bad things that might make us look like murderers. And so I think that's why we don't have a lot of slaying. And change takes effort. Being mad and yelling out my car window because you're in my town does not take any effort. I could roll my window down and cuss you out. But in order for me to get to know you, I have to give you a chance. And that takes effort, and it takes a trust that I don't think that town has right now. I would love to go to that town.
Yeah, I have a hard time relating to white men feeling like victims, and that it's hard to be a white man. I understand some of the dynamics behind that, but for example, when we talk about reparations and people say, well, how are you going to do it? It's not going to be 40 acres on you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I think it was the Washington, D.C. Act of 1872, right after the Emancipation Proclamation, 7 years later, where white slave owners were given money, basically to repair them from losing their property.
Yep.
People aren't necessarily aware of that. So reparations were given to slave owners, not to slaves, right? Mm-hmm. Sort of like, a recall on a car or something. We're gonna make you whole. And so that's an odd idea. So thinking about this Arkansas thing again, Michael, I know that you are Jewish and that is your heritage, and you don't want to be mistaken. But if you take your yarmulke off,
right? I'm not a white guy. Let's be clear.
Do you feel like it's tough to be a white man in America right now?
So yeah, I'm going to say no on that. In fact, it's a subject of some of my favorite stand-up acts are people making fun of the fact that, if you're a white guy, you can pick any time and just go to that time, and it's awesome when you get there. It is certainly not difficult, but it's similar. But what Elisa said, a few things that really resonated with me. So first, on one of my social media pages, if you guys recall, I did that video with my daughters using the Nazi flag, the Confederate flag, and this one mom's like really strong reaction was, "Boo-hoo! What do I tell my 9-year-old son who now is so sad he feels bad that he's white?" And so it's that same such a limited blinders idea that it's about you and it's about your feelings at all, instead of using it as a teachable moment to talk about, hey, it's not about you. You shouldn't have to feel sad that you're white, but the fact that you're feeling something means something about how someone else's experience like that. So, and I was on the sidelines for a conversation that I thought was exactly down the lane of what Elisa was talking about. I was waiting to get my hair cut, so much of it, like Kenny. And my barber is an African-American guy. I've been going to him for a long time. He's a really thoughtful dude. And in the chair was a guy who is, someone who clearly is a client of his for a while, ex-military. And my barber loves to get into these topical discussions with his clients, and that's why the haircuts take an hour. But this guy, every time that a topic around this issue was brought up, the guy's response, and I think he seems to dress well, he drives a nice car, he must be pretty successful, is, yeah, okay, yeah, I'm sure, or hey, I've had that happen to me. And it's without any understanding of how that is so fundamentally different than what the experience of an average black person in America is talking about. Yes, it might have happened to you once you were pulled over because your taillight's out, but it's not something that colors your day-to-day experience of how you have to go through the world. He just would not see that. And any mention of that, he felt it detracted from his personal bank account of outrage. So and so many people in that video in Arkansas who just, that kid, for those of you who don't, that kid was just standing there with a sign. He was saying nothing, and he was outside of a Walmart where a huge cross-section shops. And so many of these people expressed this idea that as if there was something personally threatening to them to acknowledge that a group in this country was needing support, was needing to have acknowledgement, was needing to have a change around them, that somehow that detracted or took away from them personally. It was a personal loss for them, and therefore it's something that I feel threatened by, and therefore I have to react this way. Because so many of them, if you guys recall, went right to all lives matter, or what about my life, or what about white lives, right? So they felt directly, personally threatened by it, and they threw out, and just for good measure, they threw out a kike in there too a couple of times.
I heard it.
Even though that guy had zero, I don't know, it didn't look Jewish to me, but whatever, they had to throw that in there too, just for good measure.
So let me wrap you up on that one, Michael, and ask Jay this question, because we're going to go back. I'm trying to think about this idea again about all attention, and we all know that all attention isn't good attention, but some of the raw data, I don't have numbers, but basically the support of Black Lives Matter as a movement has doubled in the United States. And the view that we are living in a system where there's systemic racism, it's gone from something like 33% to 66%. So without regard to what's happening, that on top of things like Mr. Trump are doing, like gaslighting people to tell them that the protests are anarchy and lawlessness, and setting the stage for certain behaviors. And I think places like Portland are valuable because it did have the fuel to last for a while, because I believe if it were predominantly black protesters, that the federal troops would not have left. What do you think?
Oh, I think they wouldn't have left. I still think, though, that there's something real unique about Portland, that there was that much response over such a sustained time, that much of a response from the non-Black community. But I think that, I don't know, I think you guys are being really gracious again, right? By saying they feel threatened, like something's being taken from them. I think there are some people who feel that way, but I think that video showed just a great deal of hatred. I think it showed people who have been raised to, maybe fear is underlying it, but just raised to hate people who aren't like them. Whether those people are Jewish, whether those people are Black, whether those people are Korean or Latinx, they have been raised to really just have no tolerance at all.
None of them yelled, what about Koreans? that ever came out of everyone's mouth. It was only, what about white people?
Right, exactly. I mean, even those people, okay, the ones who said, well, what about us? I get it. Like, you wonder, what about you? That's a fair question.
Right.
But for those people who are threatening that guy, come on, you're not worried about, what about you? You said you're going to come back and kick his ass.
10 minutes. I'm going to come back in 10 minutes. You better not be here, that guy said.
But, you know, and again, I think that we know that psychologically, a lot of that comes from a place of fear, right? Fear of the unknown, fear of the stereotypes, fear of this, you know, the big black, awful black person who is going to rape their women and pillage their towns and take all their stuff. You know, there probably is a lot of that underlying it. But I think bigger than that is that they have been taught to be intolerant and that it is okay to be intolerant. So I don't, what is the solution for that? You know, the solution for that is try to infiltrate those groups and teach them when they don't want to be taught, when they don't even want you there. I feel like there's just a certain segment of our society who will never really learn because they don't want to. I think we see the double in those numbers, Kenny, that you mentioned, because people have become more open-minded. I think they watched George Floyd die. And when they watched him die and they realized how senseless it was, I think that was when it was like, maybe there is something systemic here going on. Maybe there was something beyond just what he did, because I didn't hear a lot of people saying, well, what did he do that this officer did that? I think they started to see, and those people were open-minded to a degree, and they were willing to consider something different. But those
absolutely. So we go back to that idea of Bull Connor sort of being the real star of the civil rights movement, right? If he hadn't attacked people on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and you know, similar to today, watching George Floyd die. But then we had artists, right? Artists can do their best, but watching, what was the guy's name selling the loose cigarettes in
Eric Gardner.
So before Eric Gardner was choked out, Radio Raheem was choked out and Do the Right Thing, right? And we saw it happen. And Spike Lee was trying to talk about that. And we've been hearing it all over, but somehow this one resonated. Elisa, going back to you on this Arkansas thing or whatever else you want to add, what is it? What do you make of the person who came up and gave the note of support, almost like they had to do this in a clandestine way? What was that about?
Well, because when you grow up in a pocket of hatred, you know that you're possibly a target. And I know for my husband and I, when we drive through southern states, there are some places, there are some towns we are not going to stop in. And what a lot of people don't realize is that hatred that might be given to my husband because he is black, I get a deeper hatred because I'm a traitor. And so they go at me. And so I think people don't realize that if you're a traitor, and that's what you heard it in the video regularly. You're white, you're a traitor. I think that person who brought that note knew that they knew better. So they watched enough videos, something exposed them, they knew better. The other people didn't know better. And I think we fail to realize what the education system does to history in this country. We've painted a picture and we've taught America, and black people buy into it, white people buy into it, Jewish people can buy into it, Hispanics buy into it. You will hear, I have heard when I've hired an accountant, I've had my black friend say, it needs to be a Jewish person or a white person, you better not hire a black accountant. And I'm like, what? So we've bought into this level of who's important and who's not. And for this town, when they've completed their bubble, think about the education system that they're getting. They're being told that black people come in, they have a president come on and say, suburbia is safe. I'm not going to let low income and your crime rates won't go up. Well, what does everybody think of when they think of suburbia? White suburbia. What does everybody think of when they're saying low income? Black. And so, like, the president got up there and said that. That's what fuels that little town in Arkansas, because then somebody knows. It doesn't matter if you believe something that's wrong. If you believe it, that's the issue. Like, it doesn't matter if it's wrong. If you believe it, it's true to you. And they believe that black people, specifically black men, are a threat. and they don't want to stand up for their lives. And you hear that thing, Black power. Well, if I said white power, it would have a whole different context. You're right. It would. Just accept that and move on. Like, damn, let it go. And I think that that's where the people in Arkansas they have a lack of exposure. Their bubble is intact. People come in, they realize it's a dangerous place for non-white people. Michael would have a horrible time in that town. I would hate for Michael to walk around in that town.
But I could also just do this
you
and no one would say word one to me.
But you could take it off, Michael, and I'm not saying you couldn't.
No, it's
but
true.
That town wants to be Southern, white. We created America. We built America. You're stealing it. And you would be a thief if you kept that yarmulke on.
So, Lisa, you're getting back to what I was saying, the whole hypothesis of if-then. So if Trump is saying what he's saying, because there are some, for whatever we think about his mental capacity, there's some people around him at least that are intelligent political operatives. So if he's doing the things, then there are some people that he's speaking to.
Yeah.
Specifically, when I talked about Portland, and if the protesters had been black, that the federal troops would have stayed. It's a total Richard Milhouse Nixon remix. Nixon talked about the non-protesting Americans seeking law and order, basically pitting criminals against the good Americans, and it was a war on crime, a dog whistle for chaos in urban cities, the opposite of what you just said. What do you think of when you think of suburbia? You think of white. What do you think of when you think of urban cities? You think black. So it's the dog whistle for chaos against these urban people and the leftist hippies, and getting us ready to dial up the pressure by federal troops in places like Chicago. I do not believe for a single moment that that's not what's going on. And it's kind of scary. Jay Cherie, what do you think?
It's very scary. And then I think that, again, I mean, from his campaign, and I know, we try not to be too political in our discussion here, but the truth of the matter is that, we had an African-American man as the first African-American president, and he actually served 2 terms. And I think we thought, wow, look how far we've come. And then on the heels of him was a really contentious campaign, an awful, disrespectful campaign, one in which this one individual pretty much could tell a lie and no one seemed to care, and started this campaign of Make America Great Again. And we all kind of knew what he meant. We thought we knew what he meant. But then over time, he showed what he meant. And to me, it means Make America Hate Again. That's what that means. Because back prior to the civil rights movement, that it was a hateful place. If you were not white, if you were not a white Protestant person, it was a hateful place. And you could lose your life for not being. I think that's where he wants to take this back to. I really do. And I think that he has consistently sent messages, and they've just become more overt over time, to tell people that, yeah, something has been taken from you. You let these people have the right to vote. You let these people have the right to be educated. You let these people have the right to live wherever, and something has been taken from you. And you need to take it back. And I guess we can't really be mad at a group that was in power and they don't want to lose their power. Hell, I wouldn't want to lose my power either, right? But when you're grooming that group in that way, and you're telling them that this group only wants to take from you, they don't want to live side by side with you in harmony. They don't want the same things you want. They don't care about their kids and their health, because they're savages, right? So that now our humanity doesn't connect. And
here's a big problem with it in my mind, outside of the fact that just hatred and racism is wrong. Just from a successful economy and where the United States stands on the world stage going forward, it's no different from in being analogous to a basketball team. What if you decided, you know what, I don't like the way those black people pass the ball one time and then shoot, or run around on defense and pressing 40 minutes of defense instead of getting back in a nice, neat, clean zone and then on offense passing the ball 3 times. I like the way white guys at Indiana, like Steve Alford, play ball. I don't want to watch, I don't want to watch John Wall play. Well, if you decided that you only wanted white people on your team, or you only wanted anybody, black people on your team, you're probably not going to have the best team that you can have. Probably, I don't know why I say probably, you won't. So there was a time in the world where we were technology-wise and advancement and exposure where, you know, we've moved a long way from the wheel. We've moved a long way from the automobile. We've moved a long way from that first computer at IBM. We're not in a place that America can afford to do that and still be great. If what they want to go back to is where only white people have positions and black people are left out, and you don't allow Muslims in, and you are racist against Jews, and you don't want foreign students coming in because you don't deny visa, you're going to deny visas, we will simply preside over our own demise as a country. And I don't think there's any question about that. And you already see some of that happening. So the idea that you want to go back to sort of like leave it to Beaver and have things like they were in 1955 is just unreasonable. And
think about how the history is told, right? And so Elisa referenced this. As long as history is being told in a way that says America rose to greatness because you had these founding fathers and they believed in these principles, and you had people, they acknowledged the power of the immigrant who came here and built up our nation. And that's how we got to where we are. But it doesn't explain that the nation became wealthy on the backs of people that they enslaved. So as long as you can believe the history that America built its own greatness only through white people, then it's easy to say, well, I don't see what anyone else will contribute. Why do we really need anyone else? We got all the immigrants we needed, right? They've been here a while, and we don't need people of other faiths, people of other races, people from different nations. We no longer need to be a melting pot. As long as we can believe the nonsense that we became great without having enslaved people for 200 or 300 years.
Who's picking up, Michael or Lisa?
Well, the one thing I wanted to ask, I mean, maybe it's my naivete, but I was truly shocked at the numbers of interactions. I mean, if you, in that short video, that video was maybe what, 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes? The sheer number of people who had to interact, like there were people waiting in line. Did you see that? to give this guy a hard time. I was a little bit blown away. If someone would have said, okay, stand the guy outside of a Walmart in Arkansas for hours, how many people are gonna bother to say something? I would never ever have guessed that much. And I think that to me, it's yes, I agree about everything you said, Jay, and I think that all that is true. But what is more glaring to me is the profound ignorance, and that it is just a massive amount of ignorance on display. You know, in the world we live in today, I have less tolerance and give less benefit of the doubt when it comes to ignorance, only because information is so easily available now.
Michael, question. Michael, what would you say to the person who said to you, that's just some leftist banter, some leftist talk? Why are you calling people ignorant? These are just good, wholesome, conservative Americans. What would you say to a person that would say you're just being leftist or liberal?
Being wholesome and being good have nothing to do with one's ability to understand, to absorb truth and information when it's widely available. And so to not bother to educate yourself about anything, just like basic stuff, Kenny, like you're the worker on your job site who still had the Confederate flag screensaver. You know, he wasn't a racist. It wasn't that to him. All that meant was that this is a symbol of the stuff that I like to do. This other people that like what I like also do that, also have this on their phones, and that's all it was. So because he just hadn't really taken the time, he probably went to community college and went to high school in that area, and he's never really left. So it's just so. But I believe that you can't really forgive that anymore in the 21st century when information is plentiful and free and easily accessible.
Well, I'm going to say something to that about internalized racism for people who don't believe they're racist. And then we're going to let Lisa take us out on this subject today with whatever sort of
might not be good,
paragraph or two. That's all right. And then anyone else can chime in. But so I'm dealing with a scenario now with the old guard, right? So let's say you're in a southern city and there's a new elected official who promises to do things better. Let me tell you, if they don't get into the bowels of who's running those departments already, you have the same old racist internalized behavior. Because what happens is you can take a person, let's say me, with my background and my experience, and there's a white person across the table with a third of my experience. Even if they're older in age or the same age, they haven't done what I've done. But inherent in their mind, they may or may not believe they're racist, but when they look at me, they don't believe that I know what I'm talking about. They don't believe that I comprehend. They don't believe that I understand the paperwork. I can have an Ivy League education, a Wall Street experience, and having had 1,600 employees and been an entrepreneur for 12 years. And to them, it doesn't matter. They see my black skin and they think that they have to explain the policy to me 3 times. And it is insulting. They actually think you're stupid. And these are people that are educated, right? What do you do about that? So, Elisa, you want to take us out? And then Michael and Jay Cherie, if you have anything to follow with Elisa.
You know what? I think that for me, if we wrap this whole conversation up, I don't think Donald Trump actually cares about race very much. I think Donald Trump is very much like Candace Owens, and I think that they found a group of people who will support them, and they are going to add gasoline to that fire. I think Trump is more of a classist than he is a racist. And I think the people in Arkansas who yell out Trump 2020 and MAGA don't realize that Donald Trump would not pee on them if they were on fire. He would not let them immigrate to this country. He would want nothing to do with them. And so I think that those people in Arkansas, they don't have the ability to think outside of their bubble because they don't have the education. Michael, we're talking backwoods Arkansas. Their internet might not be up to speed. They might not have computers. Their poverty rate is probably high. And so as somebody who has dealt with Klan members, not Klan members, but people who I was pretty sure had Klan history, and severe racists regularly, I think for me, it's exposure. Kenny was saying that in a few episodes ago. You have to, you can't always put up a wall. If you have it in your spirit that you can go and speak to somebody and say, hey, let's get to know. And Kenny, what you're saying about seeing you as a black man, Jay specifically because she's black and a female, if I go to Lowe's and with my husband, they're going to talk about power tools to my husband. They are not going to talk to them about me. I am that chick. I can rock any power tool in the world. And my husband will openly say, you need to talk to her, because we're all so programmed to everybody's role. We know that black man, Kenny, somebody helped you go to Penn. You got in there because there was some white guy didn't get to go in. Like, we know that that's what America does. We know Michael's family, put some money on the book so that he could get in. Like, it wasn't because you're just hardworking. It was because you're black. Or Jay's a doctor because some white person wasn't allowed to be a doctor because Jay could do it. And that's what so many Americans are pre-programmed to believe everybody's individual role, be it by sex, be it by religion, be it by gender, sex, or be it by race. And that's where we have to work on our frickin' education. If you would learn how indoctrined and how purposeful racism was created and woven into the American history, you would go, oh, damn. The government's been playing us for centuries. Like, y'all. Y'all don't get to do this anymore.
So you said so many things. I said take us out, but you said so many things. We will follow up at a later date with things like Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow and some other things. I don't agree that Trump is not racist. I do agree that he's classist. I believe he's both. I know it's true in my gut and my heart because I've paid attention to him for years. Mm-hmm. And even though he is racist, I believe he hates poor Appalachian white people more than he does black people.
That town in Arkansas.
And they just don't know it. And that poem about first they came for the trade unionists and then they came for, they're last. They're helping him get where he needs to go, but let him win another term. They should see it through the taxes already, the tax breaks, et cetera. But, anyway. Enough of that. Michael, Jay, you guys got anything? And I was trying not to be political, but sometimes
I think that once again it supports. So how many times have we said it that if we're ever going to come up with what can we do? What a solution is? A solution is exposure. A solution is relationships. And if we can find a way to build that into how we educate our kids, even if we have to social engineer it, that might be what actually has to happen to move the needle for generations. You know, even my older kids are too late. It's got to be kids who are in kindergarten now. But that's what I agree 100% on that.
Jay?
Yeah, I have to agree. I definitely think that Donald Trump is racist. We know. I mean, no, we don't. We do. I mean, history spoke for him. You know, he had housing practices that openly discriminated against Black people, would not give Black people apartments. People had the same qualifications as white counterparts. Department of Justice did a sting, proved it. And then he had horrible practices with the people who worked in his casino in Atlantic City, openly discriminatory against Black people, removing them from the casino floor if he had white clients who didn't want a Black dealer. And he spoke at length about how he loves Jewish people because they're good with money, right? This is documented.
Right.
Oh, we know that he's racist.
He likes you, Michael.
Oh, it makes me feel so much better.
Only in the bank accounting department, though.
Exactly.
Well,
but
it's not my bag. This doctor's Jewish, I bet.
Unfortunately, he speaks for a lot of Americans who just haven't been able to say what they've wanted to say. And I think we saw a lot of those people in Arkansas. But I do think that that's not most of America. I do think that that's not most white people. And I think that to put that on most white people is very unfair. I think that what we have to do is be willing to have the difficult conversations respectfully, right? Because if you say something obnoxious to someone, then they shut down. They're not going to be your ally. But I think we have to learn how to have this conversation. I think we have to learn how to give some white people the benefit of the doubt, right? And help them to learn when they're asking questions.
So here's what I'll take us out with. At least I thought you were going to take us out, but you said a lot of good things. So you left so much on the table. So I'm going to take us out with this. Jay, you're so right. We have those people at the bottom of the moral integrity barrel that we watched in that Arkansas clip. And we have the people, and I'm talking about a strand of white people, quite frankly. And we have the people at the top of that moral integrity thing who say, hey, what can I do? I need to do something. I'm not going to pretend I know the answers, but what can I do? And then you have that, I'm worried about that middle slot. And here's why I worry about that middle slot. I challenge white people who haven't done the research, who are Republicans or call yourselves conservatively leaning, to not simply repost memes or to repeat things that you see. I challenge you to read and find out the information for yourself. And then I have to say, unapologetically, if you support Donald Trump, when you find out the facts, I'm not going to call you a racist, but I'm going to tell you that racism is not a deal breaker for you.
Yeah. You know what, Kenny, real quick, there's a great book. There's a great book called Stamped from the Beginning, and the challenge you gave, that should be the book the Republicans read. It's absolutely amazing, and it would be an eye-opener for them.
Cool. All right, guys. Until next time, this has been fun.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.